Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Memchet of Sefer Yeshayahu, and really what we're going to be walking into here in this Perek and into the next is Yeshayahu is building up his case against those people who are witnessing the opportunity to go back there to Israel in the time of Cyrus, and yet are not. And the way he starts to build it up is initially making sure that we're clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the end-all and be-all of the world, and that he created everything. Then, after we get past that initial piece of it, is he then goes and he will call out to both those who worshipped idols and those among the Jewish people who are hesitating to make Aliyah. The time has come to make Aliyah. How can you do it? I did produce for you, and I apologize, I don't remember if I sent it out in the notice, a very interesting article from Yoel Ben Nun that is found on the 929 website. How are you going to convince a stubborn person? And thanks to AI, I also translated it in the back into English. So anyone who wants English, you can see it as well. That we are going to... this is really, Yoel Ben Nun really lays it out very nicely on the piece. I don't have to go over it inside. For those who are proficient with Hebrew, you have the Hebrew. For those who are proficient in English and not as much in Hebrew, it is in English. If there are any very strange things in the English, I did not check it since AI translated it, but I think the quick glance at it was pretty good. It gives a nice background, and really, that's what all of this is about. So let me get started right with the beginning of the Perek, and the beginning of the Perek starts out, Shim'u zot Beit Yaakov hanikraim b'shem Yisrael. Listen to this, Beit Yaakov, who are referred to with the name of Israel. Now, calling them Beit Yaakov, we know the difference between Yaakov and the difference between Yisrael. Yaakov is the nation that is downtrodden. Yaakov is the underdog always. Yisrael is the princely people. It's the great one. Who are these people that he's referring to? He's talking to the people in the Golah, the people in Bavel. This is the beginning of part of his rebuke to them. And he said, and as the Radak says, listen to me, people who you're acting like a bunch of Yaakovs, okay? Even though you have descended from the greatness of Yisrael. So he's saying, you Yaakovs, okay, you should rise up, but you're not. That's the Radak's approach. That seems to be the simplest approach. Rashi picks a little bit more of a midrashic approach. And the reason he does that is because of the next phrase, Umimei Yehuda Yatzau, where it says, from the waters of Yehuda, they came from. Rashi says, this is talking about the bracha of Bilam, Yizalmayim Midalav, that it refers to the Jewish people as flowing waters, those who come from the waters of Yehuda. So as a result, Rashi says, wait a second, if the second half of this opening is talking about Yehuda, then Beit Yaakov must be something else than except Yehuda. And so he suggests, according to Rashi, that the first half of the pasuk, Shimu Zot Beit Yaakov, is referring to Shevet Binyamin. There were two tribes who were left in the southern kingdom, two tribes that maintained their identity. There were, remember, there was never, nothing was ever so black and white of where people lived. And in the southern kingdom, we had remnants of Shimon. Shimon was initially down there with Yehuda, kind of mixing with Yehuda. Some of them went north afterwards. Other tribes had come down to the south. But the two tribes with identity were Yehuda and Binyamin. Yehuda, most of the area of Binyamin is to the north of Yerushalayim. Okay, and so according to Rashi, this piece says, listen Binyamin, listen Yehuda, listen to those of you who are in the Galut, the two remaining tribes. According to Radak is, listen Jews who are not behaving as well as great as you can be. Listen, O Yaakovites, you should be behaving like Yisrael people. Hanishba'im b'shem Hashem uvelokei Yisrael yaskiru. You do always, you swear in God's name, you go ahead and you mention God's name all of the time. Lo be'emet v'lo b'tzedakah. But you're not truthful and it's not righteous what you're doing. This is the kind of people who, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, every other sentence. but are they really blessing God, or are they're just giving it lip service? And in fact, Rav Hirsch actually uses that phrase. Originally it was in German, but Julius Hirsch actually uses the phrase that these are the people who only refer to God with lip service. You're mentioning God, you're swearing by God, everything's God, 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 but your behaviors are not such. So these are the people I'm calling out to. Ki me'ir hakodesh nikrau. You were called from the sacred city. The Abarbanel says this is the continuation of this tochacha, of this rebuke. Okay, you should have. You always say, "I'm from Yerushalayim." You know, it's like the people. You can always be guaranteed of one thing. If a person comes up to you and you meet a person and he says, "You know, my grandfather was a rabbi," you can be guaranteed that that person's not behaving like the grandfather did. Okay, we were from Yerushalayim. Okay, we were Yerushalmim. Okay, that's who you always claim you are. You should have behaved better, therefore, if you were Yerushalmim. That's how the Abarbanel reads it. Hirsch, just to quote what he says, even if you wanted to, you couldn't deny your ancestry and your belonging to God. Even in exile, he's ridiculed about his origin. In other words, according to Rav Hirsch, what's happening here, Ki me'ir hakodesh nikrau, you were from Yerushalayim. You should have been better than this. Val Elokei Yisrael nismachu, and you relied. HaKodesh Baruch Hu, Hashem Tzvakot Shemo. Okay, that all of this, how could you possibly be behaving the way you're behaving? Says the Mitzudat David. How could you be B'chalal Shem Hashem? You are Yerushalmim. You saw all of this. You call at it, and your behavior is not where it needs to be. Harishonot mi'az higadati. The early things, the early events, I foretold them. I told about them already. Now, what's it referring to? Rashi says this is referring to the earlier exiles that the Navi is saying, listen to me. Very simply, what's going to happen now is I just want to prove that what I'm saying now is real. And so let's look back for a minute. I told you all about Kodesh Baruch Hu speaking that you were going to go down to Mitzrayim before you went to Mitzrayim. And I told you all about Sancheriv before Sancheriv happened. And so those early exiles, I've told you, and they came straight out from my mouth, and you heard them. Now the Radak says this isn't about. It doesn't go back as far back as Mitzrayim. Remember, this is while HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking via Yeshayahu. This is Yeshayahu talking. So Yeshayahu could be talking more about Sancheriv. To taking credit for Mitzrayim is not necessarily the automatic thing to go for. But I told you all these things. Pit'om asiti v'tavona. And what happened was those redemptions, the geulot that occurred, they occurred quickly. They occurred miraculously. I said, you're going into exile and I'm going to redeem you. Boom, it happened. 1, 2, 3. Midati kikashat. Because I knew that you were so difficult, the gid barzel or pecha, and it's like you have a steel sinew, like a steel bar, okay, in your neck, umitmatzchach nechusha, and your forehead is copper. Okay, now what does this mean? This is all, these are all metaphors. A person who has a stiff neck, and I've referred to this in the past. I love the Chassam Sofer's explanation of why we're referred to as an Am Kshei Oref. We're referred to very often as an Am Kshei Oref, as a stiff-necked person. What is a stiff-necked person? They can't turn their head around and look what happened before. We seem to lose memory. We only operate as if we're just looking straight ahead. Here, what the Navi is saying, you go ahead. The mem is the mem of Ta'am, okay? Mida'ati, because I knew, okay, that you are such a stiff-necked person. Here, your neck is not just stiff. It's got steel reinforcements in there. It's got, iron reinforcements in there, making sure it's going to be like that. And your forehead is nechoshet. Now, what is forehead nechoshet? It's great. The Mitzudat David says it's meiz panim, that you have chutzpah. Now, if you think about it, chutzpah, the English word for chutzpah is brazen. Brazen, the shoresh of brazen is Old English from the word brass. That's the chusha. Okay, it's the same thing. We're using, even in English, we have the same idea that you are a brazen people. Va'agid lecha me'az. Now listen, I told you then, B'terem tavo hishma'aticha, and I want you to remember, I told you all of these things before they ever came about. Pen tomar otzvi asam, lest you go ahead and say, no, that they were the atzabeim, they were the idols who did these things. As HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I want to make sure, okay, that you knew it was me, and that's why I always told you what was going to happen, and it happened. So you wouldn't give credit to the atzabeim, to their idols. Why is an idol referred to as an atzav? Okay, the Mitzudat David says that idols ultimately are ma'atziv lev avadav. Okay, that ultimately they pray to idols, and the idol always disappoints. So the atzabehem are the disappointers, and that's why they're referred to this way. Ufsilei v'niski tzivam, and also the graven and molten images. They were the ones. I don't want you to say that they were the ones who caused it, who were gozer, who made these things happen. Shamata chazei kulam. You heard it and you saw it all. Rashi says you heard all of those early things that were going to happen. Vatem halo tagidu. And you, in this generation, says Rabbi Victor Belgansi, you saw it everything with your eyes. Shouldn't you be telling the next generation, listen, now when we're promised the Geula, it's going to happen. We saw what happened with Sancheiriv. We know all the history. Shouldn't you be in inducting the next generation to be people who believe and have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Radak takes it a little bit differently. Halo tagidu, he says, aren't you, how could you go ahead and deny what you saw? You should be able to admit to it, tagidu. Hishmaticha chadashot me'ata. Okay, now I'm going ahead and I'm telling you new things. I'm going to reveal things to you. Okay? I'm going to reveal them directly to you, says Rashi. Mitzudat Sion says, I'm going to tell you, okay, and what I'm going to tell you about is I'm going to tell you chadashot me'ata unitzurot velo yadatem. I'm going to tell you about the things that are going to happen that are hidden that you didn't know about. That's referring to the downfall of Bavel. The Mahari Kra says unitzurot. He says those things that are going to be kept. Actually, linsor is both to hide and to hold back. If I'm going to be treasuring something, I can also hold it back in that same way. So the Marie Kras says they're held back because I'm going to hold my promise. I'm going to fulfill my promise. Okay. According to Rav Schwab, and I'm just going to read what he says, but the new developments to which I'm referring now are nitzurot. They're hidden. They were not predicted, and you did not know about them. So what the Marie Kras says, what now it says, I'm sorry, what Rav Schwab says, what the Navi is saying, okay, all those past things, you look back in history and you see they were all foretold and everything came true. You didn't bother telling anybody that that's the pattern that I have, that's who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. He tells you it's going to be, he fulfills what he's going to be, he's done it suddenly. Adds Rav Schwab, now I'm going to tell you new stuff that no one has heard about before. And those new things should be following that same pattern. You should have faith in what I'm telling you now based on the experience of what had been before. Ata, now, nivru. Okay, now, vilomeaz. This is new things that were created. The Ibn Ezra says nivru is nigzeru. Now they've been decreed. Okay, and it's not something from before. What is happening to Bavel, explains Rav Hirsch, is going to be something new, not like it had been before. Beforehand, you never heard about it before. Something like this you never heard before. Pentomar hineyadatim. Thus you're going to say, hey, I know about this already. Now, interesting, Rav Schwab, in his piece on this parak, he says this is referring to the Nes of Purim. he says that if you look chronologically, and again, the chronology of this is very complicated, Rav Schwab's taking the position that when all of this is being foretold is right at the time of Achashverosh, Mordechai, and Esther. And I'm going to tell you right now, salvation is going to come about in ways that you never expected, because according to rabbinic chronology, according to the classic chronology of Seder Olam Rabbah, remember, it was Achashverosh and then Daryavesh was their son. So he's saying that salvation is going to come in ways, the poor nace, and then the rest is going to come. Yeah,
So the reason this is really very puzzling to me is that Yeshayahu lives in the time of Yeshayahu. And the Navi and subsequent Naviim are continuously giving a chance for Am Yisrael to do tshuva, which means that they don't have to go through this, which means it might not be fulfilled if the Jewish people do tshuva. And if that would happen, then this would come out as false. What's going to be forthcoming? The downfall of Babel. Babel isn't supposed to even attack them if they do tshuva. What do you say?
Well, I say two things. Remember, I say three things. Remember, when we're talking about the second half of Yeshayahu, the way it's being presented, the second half of Yeshayahu, these are the things that were taught to the students and were held on to. Because remember, he refers explicitly to Cyrus. And Cyrus is going to be the redeemer. This parak is the only parak that only has reference to Cyrus without mentioning his name. So that's number one. So Yeshayahu knew, and everything can change, which also is the real problem. Why why secular scholars say he can't be talking about Cyrus, because even from a theological perspective, they could do tshuva, but they didn't. And he's now talking as if he is living right then at that time, as if Cyrus is already happening. I think that's answer number one. Answer number two to it is that when you look in all of these things, there's always the opportunity for tshuva, and tshuva will be referenced briefly in this parak, but these are perkei nechama. By all of these parakim are taking place as if we know it's happening. Now, Chizkiyahu in Yeshayahu's time was already the disappointment. You recall, Gemara says Chizkiyahu should have been the Mashiach. He wasn't the Mashiach. So Yeshayahu already saw some of that disappointment. He saw the alliance that was already made with Mitzrayim, which was a false alliance. He saw a lot of these things in his time frame. And so the other piece is we can always hope for tshuva, and in which case these prakim of Yeshayahu would not have become probably part of the Sefer, because they wouldn't have had eternal meaning. Okay, because remember, they came together at the time of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, which is later in time. I don't know. It would be very interesting to see how that played out. Yeah.
It is, in fact, happening around the time about the Shver, and then they really does fit nicely, or not nicely.
It's foretelling what will be. Yeshayahu can't be at the time of Achashverosh. It's foretelling what is happening in the time of Purim, according to Rav Schwab.
That's a big problem, right?
The Yaakov Yisrael.
Yeah, it is. Two of those, the Neville ones were not. Who ended up going up to Yerushalayim? And who ended up going back?
Well, those are going to be the Nebuchadnezzars, right? Yeah. No. But where they're being addressed is when they are in Galut.
Fine, it's the fine.
Yeah, so we have the same thing.
Based on that kind of nice interpretation, I would like to suggest that if there were no exodus from Yehuda, from the southern kingdom, then you would do a reread of Pasuk Aleph, which would be Beis Yaakov and Ephraim B'Shem Yisrael, northern kingdom that in Yeshayahu's day already went to Babel. And since they were already exiled to Babel, they were the ones who could.
Yeah, but how do you take the next piece? I mean, Yehuda.
We made Yehuda yet, so because they departed from the base Yehuda,
So-
the Mamlacha,
So
Yehuda, they made their own kingdom.
it's nice. It's nice. I guess the difference. So what basically you're saying is that this parrot could work if it was talking about something entirely different. Now, the reality is, and we know this also, part of the difficulties of this latter half of Yeshayahu is there are so many things we don't understand that we are interpreting it as Yeshayahu gave us the instructions to interpret it based on our experience. Excuse me. So based on our experience, we interpret it this way. If our experience had been different, maybe, or maybe it wouldn't have been included, or maybe a lot of things. I yesterday in the Gemara shir, I quoted one of my teachers. Some of you may remember him, Levi Van Leeuwen. We had him as an 8th grade teacher at Hillel Torah, and Levi Van Leeuwen. At one point, I was asking what if questions, and at some point he said, "Stop asking what if questions." Okay, so I don't know. What if? Yeah, maybe not. There's so many different permutations, combinations, what could be going on in that alternate universe, but we didn't get there, unfortunately. We didn't go. Gamlo shamata posuk chet. Gamlo shamata, gamlo yadata. Okay. In this kind of case, the Abarbanel says, listen, you didn't hear, you didn't know. Gam me'azlo pitcha oznecha. You didn't even open your ears. Now, the Abarbanel says there are 3 similar statements. Poetic it could be, but it's also referring, he suggests, to 3 exiles. The existing exile, which they were in Bavel, the Galut, that was going to be the Galut, the existing exile, our exile. Okay, the exile of Rome, the exile of Bavel, and the exile of Mitzrayim. So you didn't listen. Nowadays, you're not listening. You didn't know. Bavel, you didn't know. You didn't listen. You weren't hearing anything when you were in Mitzrayim. Ki yadati bagod tivgod. Because I knew, unfortunately, you Jews, you're always going to rebel against me. Bagod tivgod is a lashon of tmidut, of constant. Whenever you have this double. Ufoshea mi beten koralach. And you've been sinners since before you were born. You have sinned. The Radak says, from the moment you were a nation in Mitzrayim, you sinned. It adds on, by the way, you could even say the fact, Jews, that you sin, that's in your DNA. That's the other way explains it. That's a mibeten. The difference, by the way, between a boged and a poshea. A boged is a rebellious one. Poshea is a sinner. I don't know how ArtScroll is translating it, but begidam is it is when you act against those who are your friends. Okay, mirman neged brit re'im. Whereas pshia is where you're rebelling against authority. Okay, you have been Jews. Listen, I know all along that you're, pretty miserable. Okay, I know that. Leman shemi arichapi, and despite the fact that you have sinned and you have rebelled, and this is what you keep on doing, the reason I'm going to redeem you and I'm not going to destroy you is ultimately leman shemi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing it for his own sake. Utehilati chatam lach. And I am going to, for my tila, for my praise, I'm going to seal it. Echatam, even though it's the word chotem, which is like a nose, Hirsch says it's actually a, and I forgot the exact term in grammar, because it sounds the same, it can actually have a similar meaning, as if it was written chet taf mem. Okay, that's what he suggests. Rashi says, I'm going to close my nose from breathing fire, basically, from being so angry at you. Now, what's interesting, and this is where that article I gave you from Yoel Bin-Nun talks about it, is ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he created us not to be 100% always on board, because then he doesn't need us. Those are malachim. And not to be always sinners. The fact that we sometimes do right and sometimes do wrong is what brings glory to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not going to destroy us. He's promising, despite the fact that we probably deserve it, levilti hachritecha. I'm not going to cut you off. Hinei tzarafticha v'lo b'chasef. I have refined you, not like you refine silver. Now, Rashi says actually it's meant that really I refined you through the fires of Gehenna. Okay, the Radak says no. And this piece of Radak is brilliant. The Radak says, listen, if I would refine you like you refine silver, what happens is you destroy all the impurities. I didn't want to destroy all the impurities. Okay. What I did is I refined you through suffering, but I didn't destroy all of the bad. I gave you the opportunity to do tshuva. The way I've refined you is I've given it through the experiences of Jewish history and through the troubles of Jewish history. You've become a finer person, not perfect. I could have created, many years ago, I had a person who at this point will remain nameless. He was trying to convince me to separate out Idachron, to boys and girls. Even if it was perfect, it's very complicated to do by law. It's a co-ed school by bylaws, but whatever. And at one point I said, if we do it, there's going to be kids who are going to end up going to a non-Orthodox day school. I said, we could do a fine job. And he said to me like this, said, Lenny, it's quality, not quantity. After which I called up, I called up Beryl Wine afterwards, who knew the person I was speaking to very well. And he said, don't change a thing. Okay. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I could have solved this problem. I could have made you all perfect. I could have destroyed all the evil, or destroyed all those who went against us. I chose not to do that, says the Radak. I chose to give people the opportunity to become better themselves as opposed to destroying them. And I chose you as a result through the cauldron of that suffering. The Shadal says, interestingly, that in Aramaic and in Syriac, the word bachar is the cognate to the Hebrew word bachan. And as a result, he says, Becharticha, Bechur Oni is the same thing as I tested you through the cauldron of suffering. Not that I chose you, and the advantage of taking that approach is we've already been chosen. If we were already chosen, so this is a testing. Lema'ani e'esem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is for my sake I'm doing this. Now think for a moment to Tehillim Kuf Tet Vav. Middle of Hallel, Lolano Hashem Lolano, okay, Kilashimcha, right? We praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say, you're not doing it for us. Don't do it for us because we don't deserve it. We'll never get anything. Right? But it's for your sake. We make this plea regularly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that fulfill Lama'ani I said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that Ki ech yechal uchvodi la'acher lo eten. Because how could I cause the chilul Hashem and give my glory I can't give to anyone else. In other words, ultimately, if I destroy you, the same thing, just like Moshe Rabbeinu's plea, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, if I do that, everyone else is going to say that their gods were more powerful. Yeah, Leah.
I think that you mentioned that Yeshayahu was a disappointment because the chapter in Lovanim is sometimes attributed to him.
It can be, right. And so at the same kind of point, we have all of this. Shema Yaakov. And so now HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and he says, listen, let's understand, okay, who you're working with. Okay. Understand, I'm all powerful. The Israel Mekorai, the Jews who I've called you Jews, Ani Rishon Afani Achron. I am from the beginning. I am from the beginning and I'm through to the end. It says, Yisrael Mekorai, God calls us Yisrael. Your father, says Rashi, called you Yaakov, and I called you Yisrael. Anihu, Ani Rishon, Ani Acharon, says the Malbim. Okay. Understand that all of the miracles that are going to happen, I did them. I was with you, I was with you in the first Geulah, in the Geulah of Egypt, and I was with you in the Geulah that will be coming as well. And both of those are when I'm going to be saving you. Says the Navi, excuse me 1 second, I just have to take care of one. I apologize very much. I just have to take care of one quick thing, and I will be right with you. Says in Pasuk Yud Gimel, Af Yadi Yesaдаretz. Not only am I existing for all eternity, my hand founded the land, and my right spread out the heavens. Now, because of the fact that the second half says right, so some of the Mefarshim say my left hand founded the land, okay, because my right hand was busy on the heavens. And some of the Mefarshim say my right hand is on the heavens because the heavens are greater and more significant, and the left hand is over the land, which is more physical. Okay, all of those are nice. But the big word here is ah. Not only have I been ever present, I created everything. And when we say the Yemini Tibcha Shamayim, the interesting thing in there is the word tefach. The word tefach is, it's a fist. It's the size of a hand. So there's two possibilities. One possibility among the Meforshim, and this is what the Ibn Ezra says, I measured out. I measured out with a tefach, the heavens itself. The Rebbe Victor Rebbe Elganzi says, no, I smoothed everything out. I flattened, I arranged everything. Why? Because tefoach is to flatten. Okay, you take your hand and you pat something down. And that's the tipchayir in this kind of, what this would mean here. But when I call to them, says the Ibn Ezra, I call to heavens and earth to do what needs to be happening, they stand at attention. They stand up right at that moment. They respond to me. He kavtzu kolchem. All of you gather together now. V'shema u'shemau. And hear this. So that David says he's talking to those who are worshiping idols. The Dat Mikras says he's talking to the Bnei Yisrael. Both of them can be correct. It can be the Bnei Yisrael who are worshiping the idols. Mi vahem higid et elem. Who from all of those idols have ever said anything like this? Hashem ahevo. The one God loves, will do what he wants in Bavel, will do God's bidding in Bavel, Uzra'o Kastim, and he will spread out his arm against the Kastim. Who is the Ahevo? Well, classic, many of the Meforshim say the Ibn Ezra is at the lead of it. It says this is a reference to Cyrus. Cyrus is going to do what God wants. He's going to do God's bidding in Bavel. The Targum Yonatan, though, interestingly says Hashem Ahevo is talking about the Jewish people, that we will do God's bidding. The other Meforshim would say, Cyrus, it seems to fit in because God said, I'm all powerful. I've created everything. The one who loves me, this one is going to do my bidding for me in Bavel. Ani dibarti, avkarativ. I have spoken. I have even called him. Okay. Again, the ani, the double language, whenever you have it, is chizuk. It's strengthening the point. I alone have spoken. I alone have called him. Havi otiv v'itzliach darko. I have brought him, as the Dat Mikra says, from a far off land, and I'm going to make sure his path is successful. Kirvu elai, shim'u zot, come close to me. He's calling to the Jewish people, the Navi. He says, I want you to hear this. And what do I want you to hear? I want you to hear the nevuah I'm going to give at the end of this parak, pasuk chof to pasuk chof bet. But now let me build it up first, says the Navi. Lo merosh b'seita dibarti. I want to be very clear. Whenever I've given prophecies, I've never done them in a whisper. I've always given the prophecies, even if they were unpopular, even if they were against people we served, I've given them out loud. I've done them. Okay. The Shadal says he got a tim b'farhesia. I said them publicly, everything. Okay. Now, interesting, Radak says this is specifically talking, as Yeshayahu was talking, he's talking about the fall of Sancheiriv. Okay, despite the power of Sancheiriv, despite the siege he had placed, that power was always there. He said, I'm going to do it. Me'ei teota shamanim. From the moment I was there, ve'ata Hashem Elokim ko amar Hashem go'alcha. This is what God is going to say, the one who redeems you, Kadosh Yisrael, the sacred of Israel, Ani Hashem Elokecha, milamedcha loho'il. I will teach you for purpose. Madricha b'derech telech. I will guide you in the way you should go. Now, me'etei Hasham. The Dat Mikra says, from the moment that all of those events I had foretold started to unfold, I was there. And now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending me with the Ruach of the Nevuah. What is the Ruach of the Nevuah? So Hashem Elokim v'Rucho, in that kind of case, it could be that Rucho, according to the Ibn Ezra, means it's saying about Malachim. And when it says Hashem Elokim Shalachani v'Rucho, that God sends me, and he also informs me sometimes via his messenger. So he says, listen, this is what I want you to hear. God is the one who is Milamedcha Lahoil. Milamedcha Lahoil. David Tzvi Hoffman's, by the way, his chuvas are called Milamed Lahoil. Okay, it's a play on these kinds of things. But the Mitzudat David says, I'm going to teach you things that will be of benefit for you. The Barbanel says, I'm going to teach you things so that when you go back to Yerushalayim, you won't continue in the ways of sin, but you will follow now the ways of the Torah. Okay, says Rav Schwab, everything that has passed, Milamed Chalo, has been for the purpose of making you better. Madrichecha b'derech telech. Now, in this case, it can be literal. Okay, that as Rav Schwab says, I'm going to show you the path. I'm going to get you the tickets on El Al. I'm going to show you how to get back to Eretz Yisrael. Interestingly, Das Sofrim takes it a little differently. Madrichecha b'derech telech. He says, I will guide you, but derech telech. But you have to start the journey. You have to start the walk, and I will then guide you along that walk. Lu hikshavta lemitzvotai, if you had only listened to my mitzvot, vayhi kenar shlomecha, your peace would have been flowing like a river. Now, we've talked about water in a couple of times already. This flowing with a river, the Radak says it would have been just rabim. It would have been a vast, an abundance amount of shalom. And not just evetzit kadcha kigalayam. And the righteousness would be like the waves of the sea. What's the advantage of waves of the sea? They never stop. Okay, the tzedek would have been constant. Vayhi kachol zarecha, and continuing on this metaphor of the sea and the waters, your offspring are going to be like the sand. We've seen the same metaphor with Avram Avinu. Okay, multitudes. That's another way of saying it. It said to A, me'echa kimotav. And your offspring, the ones who come from your insides, will be like its insides. What are the insides of the water? Fish. Fish come up to Rosh Hashanah. Fish is something that is a bracha of multitude. Fish come in schools. You don't have individual fish going around unless if it's Nemo. Your fish are always in schools, and so they're always with others. And so that's that kind of blessing as well. Interestingly, Kima Otav, according to the Abarbanel and according to the Shadal, picks up on the same point. No, he says, what's the inside of the oceans? The clumps of sand. Okay, it's the whether you say pebbles or it's the clumps of sand, that's how you're going to be. Lo yikaret v'lo yishamed shmo milefanai. Your name name will never be cut off or destroyed. Even though, remember, this all started out as Luig Shafta the mitzvot. I've only you do listen to my mitzvos. And even though you didn't listen to my mitzvos, you're still going to be redeemed. And now comes the Nevuah. And this is the Nevuah. Tze'umi Bavel. Leave Bavel. Birchu mi Kastim. Run away from Kastim, another name for Bavel. Bikol Rina Yidu. Hashmiu Zot. And do so with song. Hear this. Hotzi'uha ad kitzei haaretz. Bring it out to the edge of the earth. What does it mean to bring it out to the edges of the earth? Bring it out, publicize it, that the Geulah has come. Do it publicly. It's not enough that you just are going to be redeemed. It has to be done in a public fashion. Everyone has to know it. Imru, say, Ga'al Hashem Avdo Yaakov. God has redeemed his servant Yaakov. V'lo tzam'u bechoravot holicham, and they were never thirsty, even though God walked them bechoravot. God walked them around the parched deserts. In order to get there, it's Israel. There's a lot of different ways. It was a difficult walk, but nevertheless, he made sure they had the water. Now, the interesting thing is the second part of this pasuk. Mayim mitzur hizilamo. They went ahead and they got water from rocks. He allowed to flow. Vayivkat sur vayazuvu mayim. They broke rocks and water came out. The Radak asks a question. This is talking about the Shivat Zion, the redemption from at the time of Bavel. Nowhere in Ezra and Nehemiah do we find any description of these miraculous occurrences of water flowing from rocks. So what's he talking about? Now, there's a whole bunch of ways of answering it. One way of saying is, okay, so he didn't say anything, but that's kind of hard to imagine. The Ibn Ezra, the Abarbanel, therefore says, Kol pasuk mashal. This is meant as a mashal, it's a parable. God took care of you. But if you think about it, why would he do this? Because we're comparing the way the Jews were taken out of Bavel to the way they were taken out of Egypt. I'm using the imagery of Yetziat Mitzrayim in this mashal. And so therefore God brings out water from the rocks. It's not meant literally, because if it was literally, Ezra would have probably said something about it. Okay, but it's meant the level of protection that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to the Jewish people. Ein shalom amar Hashem l'rashaim. There is no peace, says Hashem, to the evil ones. Who are the evil ones? Rashi says we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, you exiled my people. You're not going to have a peaceful life. The Mari Kras says it's talking about those who live in Bavel. The Ibn Ezra says this is talking about the Rishonim from the Jewish people. Who were the Rishonim from the Jewish people, says the Dat Mikram. The Rishonim were the ones who refused to listen to the command of the Navi, Umi Bavel. Those were the people who are not going to have peace. You think you have such a comfortable life in the Galut, in the diaspora? You think it's so good? And it's so hard to go back there to Israel? Ein shalom amar Hashem l'Rishonim. Don't build up that straw horse that's the reason that it's going to be so hard there, and that it's easy here, because that easiness is going to disappear. Now, by the way, except for Ira, all the rest of us should be feeling bad after hearing that explanation of the Dat Mikra, okay? Because there are so many comparisons to our time in this parak. Yafa?
So we know from Ezra and Nehemiah that even Ezra and Nehemiah took a long time to go back. And when Ezra left, didn't he make sure that he had the ones who were suspect, so to speak, and he left the goods, you know?
Well, he didn't make sure. They came forward
Oh, they came forward?
to say that Ezra only picked the lower class. The upper class chose not to come.
Oh, you know? And if that amongst them, Ezra delayed going because Zerubbabel went first, then comes Ezra, then years later came Nehemiah.
And all of it were at the different times. And you can't question Ezra and Nehemiah. There was a lot of political machinations that were going on. There were a lot of political efforts to make sure that what was going to be in Eretz Yisrael was going to be able to be built into a Beit HaMikdash. There were people who were necessary there, okay? And that could be the very same explanation that sometimes comes of who doesn't have a requirement to make Aliyah, okay? And at times, there are certain people who are still necessary for the Galut to be able to operate, and perhaps for the Geulah to happen as well. Who those people are, not so simple to say, oh, I'm one of them. Yeah.
I'm going to suggest.
Good. Make us all feel better, please.
When Ezra and Nehemiah went, they had a lot of enemies in Eretz Yisrael. Sanballat, the Samaritans, all of them. Ain't shalom. So if you're afraid of them, ain't shalom Hashem l'shayim. Don't worry about them. I'll be with you, I'll take care of them. They're not gonna get away with stopping you, so to speak.
It's very nice. I haven't seen it anywhere. But again, because, oh, it's the only way we feel better. It's the only way we feel better, okay? And it's the only way to say that the Rishonim are not referring to Jews. But we do find within classic sources that Jews can be considered Rishonim. I mean, remember, we are referred to in this parak, okay, as Poshim, right? We are referred to as Bogdim, okay, as sinners and rebellious ones, okay? And we are referred to as people who have not listened. So it could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. We'll stop right here on this very happy note. Akshosh,
Like, well, the time is sure, I think they, Eric,